We were assigned the book Flatland by Edwin A. Abbott. This is our paper slide project where we will explore the first dimension, the second dimension, the third dimension, and the fourth dimensional worlds. This is done by Ari Catherine and Carly Davis. Flatland is a two-dimensional world where its inhabitants are literal geometric shapes, such as squares, circles, triangles, etc. Later in the story, color was outlawed altogether, but in Flatland. However, to make our presentation aesthetically pleasing, we have colored them in. The land of Flatland is entirely flat, so they only have length and width, and no height. They only know of the directions north, east, south, and west. They cannot fathom the directions of up and down. In Flatland, the shapes live in an overly structured society where shapes are put into social classes depending on the number of sides that they have. For example, women are represented by straight lines, signifying that they have very limited rights. However, men are represented by full polygons, showing their superiority. The highest class, the priests, are represented by circles because they have too many sides to count. The circles in Flatland hold the authority. Since Flatland is a two-dimensional world, the inhabitants of Flatland can only view each other from their sides and they can feel their angles. This is how they distinguish who is what shape. For example, a square will go around a triangle and feel that it has three sides and has three angles of 60 degrees. This tells the square that it is in contact with a triangle. In Flatland, there is a constant state of fog. However, when a shape gets close to another, their angles will show through the fog. Depending on how rapidly angles are shown, will notify the shape who they are interacting with. This is how they occasionally use their sight recognition. In a one-dimensional world called Lineland in the story, characters can only see from east to west, not north and south. The inhabitants on Lineland all live on an extensively long line. The men are represented by a line, with a head at each end. Women, however, are only points on the line. For the inhabitants of Lineland to distinguish who they are interacting with, they can only see the people directly beside them. However, they use their voices to communicate to others around them. When the voice of one line talks to another, they use the time it takes them to respond to determine how far away they are from each other. If a two-dimensional figure entered a one-dimensional world, they would be very confused on how the one-dimensional figure could not see them. The two-dimensional figure would have to enter the plane on which the one-dimensional figure resides on. Once entered, they would have to explain how they use the directions of north and south to enter there. Without being able to show the one-dimensional figure this, the two-dimensional figure would be confused on how the one-dimensional figure didn't understand this concept, while the one-dimensional figure would be frustrated that it was not able to experience these abilities. The two-dimensional figure was confused at how a one-dimensional figure could not understand the directions of north and south. However, when a three-dimensional figure is introduced to a two-dimensional figure, then the two-dimensional figure begins to understand that there may be other dimensions out there. A three-dimensional figure, like a cube, understands that there are directions called up and down that the two-dimensional figure does not understand. This may seem almost magical to the two-dimensional figure, just like the directions of north and south were magical in Lineland. We live in a three-dimensional world. We are not able to experience or fathom things and ideas of the fourth dimensional world. Some things that a fourth dimensional being could do that would seem magical to us would be to enter a three-dimensional being, like ourselves, and extract our insides without harming or cutting us open. It would have the ability to remove things from a three-dimensional world and make it seem like something had just disappeared magically. Each dimension has special abilities that seem magical to the other dimensions. To generate different shapes from separate dimensions, you have to start from the 0 dimension and go all the way to the 4th dimension, and so on. So you start out with a point that has no dimensions. You then add another point to connect them to form a line, and that creates 1 dimension. You continue to add lines until full shapes and polygons are created, and that makes it the 2nd dimension. To create the 3rd dimension, you replicate the image on the 2-dimensional world and connect its vertices to make the shape a 3-dimensional figure. To then move into a 4-dimensional world, you take your cube or your 3-dimensional figure and make right angles at the 3 directions the cube or figure can move in, and that makes it the 4th dimensional figure. However, that cannot be identified or drawn out because we live in a 3-dimensional world and we are limited to only our 3-dimensional plane. A lot of things we have discussed happened in Flatland. The story surrounds a character named A Square. He narrates this story from prison. The first part of the 2-part story is where A Square explains the way that Flatland is set up socially. He talks about how the social classes are organized by the number of lines the shapes have. So once again, the circles are at the top of the class structure, then it goes to the higher polygons, then the women are at the bottom, consisting of only a line. The circles hold all of the power here, and their policies limit the freedom of the polygons and all of the women. If anyone goes against what the circles say, they often have executions. The second part of the story is where A Square remembers a dream that he had where he went to Line Land and initially mistook a line he met as a woman. However, he finds out that he is in Line Land and the whole world is just a really long line. He sees that they can only move in 2 ways, and they depend a lot on hearing. A Square fails to explain a two-dimensional world to the monarch of Line Land. The monarch gets really angry at him and he attacks him. And then A Square has woken up from his dream. Back in Flatland, A Square is giving his grandson a lesson on squaring, where he demonstrates how 3 to the 2nd is 9. To us, that means 3 squared equals 9. He tells him how this is like a square with 9 smaller squares inside of it. His grandson then asks what 3 to the 3rd would be. A Square shoots the question down and sends his grandson to bed. A Square thinks about the strange idea his grandson brought up when he is visited by a mysterious creature, a sphere. The sphere notifies A Square that it comes from a place called Spaceland. A Square initially reacts badly to the sphere coming in, so the sphere takes him to Spaceland where he can feel how real 3-dimensional figures are. While in Spaceland, they look at Flatland and A Square is able to see his home from above. A Square is shocked and asks the sphere if there are any additional dimensions that she knows of. The sphere gets upset by A Square's questions and pushes him back into Flatland. When he gets back to Flatland, A Square has another dream, where the sphere takes him to Pointland. This place has no dimensions. When they are there, they meet the monarch of Pointland, and he tells them how the whole universe is just himself. They both try to inform him that there are other dimensions, like Flatland and Spaceland, where they are from, but they have no luck. Then they return to Flatland, where the sphere tells A Square all about the other dimensions. And from this conversation, the sphere encourages A Square to spread the news about this to everyone. Once woken up from his dream, A Square goes to tell his grandson all about his findings from the other dimensions that he got to experience. Right when he gets to the part talking to his grandson about the third dimension, the Grand Council of Flatland publicly announces that if anybody tries to proclaim of other worlds or other dimensions, they will be sent to prison. When his grandson hears this, he stops listening and refuses to talk about it anymore. This upsets A Square, so he begins to write about the third dimensional world. He gets arrested after publicly talking about his experiences in Spaceland. He writes the story Flatland in jail. This was his story.